Chapter 4. The Occult in Babylonia. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and is become a habitation of devils, and a hold of every unclean spirit, and a hold of every unclean and hateful bird. Revelation chapter 18, verse 2. Devils, demons, and supernatural powers described by the various peoples of Assyria and Babylonia form the archetype of much of the demonology which the West, and parts of the East itself, have inherited. As has been mentioned in an earlier part of this book, many of the spirits were brought by the Akkadians, who really established the Babylonian culture, from the far steppes of High Asia. Thus we find that many of the rituals and spells carried westward by the Aryans, the Greeks and Romans, the Arabs and the Jews were derived from supernatural activities which originated in what is now Asiatic Russia. The same rites and beliefs, in some measure, linger on in their primitive state among communities of arrested cultural development throughout the world, principally Siberian, Eskimo, and other Mongoloid peoples. Other civilizations, like the Chinese and Japanese, the Assyrians and Egyptians, adopted and adapted the cults to their own brand of thinking. This is one of the answers to the vexed question as to whether all magic has a parent root somewhere. It is not, however, the complete answer. The pure Akkadian, Mongoloid forms of this magic are still preserved in the bilingual tablets of such collections as Assur-bani-pal's library, while other tablets show the fusion of Semitic and other beliefs with those of the Highland conquerors. The raising of the hand was to the Babylonians a sign of the commencement of a magical or religious rite, a concept which is retained in signals of benediction and blessings in general, and which has been fully described by Ernest Crawley. Although Assur-bani-pal's tablets were not collected until the 7th century BC, they date back almost to the earliest days of the Turanian Mongoloid arrival in the eastern Mediterranean. The tablets are a treasure of magical lore, for the king seems to have a mania for book collecting. Everything that was written, and this was mostly books on magic and occult matters, had to be copied and brought to him. There are even letters, also tablets, extant, asking that anything of any interest at all should be copied onto clay and sent to him forthwith, from every quarter of the kingdom. Early in the series, the tone is set. Assur-bani-pal himself curses anyone who effaces his name from a tablet. May Assur and Bilit cast him down in wrath and anger and destroy his name and those of his posterity. The library, containing thousands of books, was unearthed at Kuinyuk, the site of Nineveh. Some of the tablets, it is true, have prayers and incantations directed towards only one god, but most contain the names of a multitude of individual spirit gods who are the forefathers of our evil spirits, as known to the Church, and so sedulously hunted by ecclesiastics. Many of the tablets refer to evil influences abroad, and prayers and supplications were made to avert them. Magical rites were undertaken, and specific mention is made of the implements of the art, not forgetting incense and the special kinds of wood used in the kindling. Offerings of honey, dates, and grain form an important part of the ritual, and it is here that we find the earliest form of the magical circle, which is used the world over to safeguard the magician and his assistants. Some of the tablets advise certain invocations, incantations, and offerings for the healing of the sick. As with Arabic magic and other Semitic rites, a knot is tied in a cord and then loosened, that the sick man may be well again. Babylonians were fortunate in being able to consult such processes to defeat eclipses, otherwise the shadow would remain forever. To effect this, the priests repeated the following. O Sibziana, in the heavens they bow down before thee. Rahman, the Prince of heaven and earth, at thy command mankind was named. Give thou the word, and with thee let the great God stand. Give thou my judgment, make my decisions. I, thy servant Assur-bani-pal, the son of his god, whose god is Assur, whose goddess is Assuritu. In the evil of the eclipse which has taken place, in the evil of the powers of the portents evil, not good, which are in my palace and my land. Because of the evil spectre which is bound to me, I have petitioned and glorified thee. The raising of my hand accept. Hearken to my prayer, free from my bewitchment. Loosen my sin. Let there be turned aside whatever evil may come to cut off my life. May the favourable Sidhu be ever at my head, and at thy command let me live. There has been a good deal of painstaking research into the origins and functions of gods and spirits in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. But it is interesting to note that the functions of gods as aids to magicians have been largely passed over by occultists. The Babylonian system, all the same, was based upon the magical and supernatural character of gods and the human relation with them. Each victory over an enemy was recorded, together with the spirit god with whose help it had been achieved. Gods often possessed human form coupled with superhuman faculties and wisdom. Moreover, they had lived in the world, had loved and died like ordinary men. They were married and represented stars and elements like the demons and spirits of true sorcery. When they died, their powers became absolute. When a disciple prayed to them, they could utter magical words of power and weave spells of strange mystery. Storms, floods, earthquakes, and pestilence were the work of angered gods. When these upheavals made themselves felt, the gods had to be appeased. There was no other way to safety and rescue. Enlil, god of the earth, was worshipped at Nippur. Ea was god of the deep. Uruki was the moon god, Utu the god of the sun. Marduk, the god of Babylon itself, had the greatest possible reverence paid to him. Among other important spirit deities was Eshidam in the city of Kuthar, the god of those killed in battle. Of the goddesses we hear less. Their children became gods through their fathers. The most important goddess of all was Ishtar, the Semitic goddess of battle, and the local deity of the city at Sippar. In other places she was known as the deity of love. She it was who later became Aphrodite with the Greeks and Venus to the Romans. I visited her shrine in Cyprus, once the greatest place of pilgrimage of the ancient world. Here, even today, there are many magical superstitions concerning the immense ruined place among the local Greek population. The centre of the earth was believed to be the place of the dead, the cavern called Aralu. This place, which was a sort of hell where all humanity went, whether good or evil, was surrounded by high walls, watched over by demons. There was little belief in reincarnation, for the name of the place was Matlatari, the place of no return. The dead lived in utter darkness, eating dust. And to this destination everyone went. There was neither reward nor punishment for deeds of this world in the Babylonian hereafter. The demons were horrific creatures, part human, part animal, and probably were the prototypes of Western demonology. It is interesting that many of these demons sculpted in the Far East resemble these Near Eastern devils, and probably sprang from similar origins in the imagination of the nomad tribes of Central Asia. These Nedu, gatekeepers, had lists of those who were to be taken to hell, their teeth long as fangs, their eyes glaring and large balls, their claws long and sharp. As soon as a person died, the demons of the Matlatari presented themselves and took charge of the body after burial, escorting it to the abode of the goddess Allatu, the Allat of the Arabs, and one of the images smashed in Mecca by Muhammad himself. Allatu bore the frightening appearance of having a lion's head and grasped a serpent in each hand. Great care had to be taken with the burial of the dead, lest the ghost, eskima, be caught by a sorcerer and used to bewitch the living relatives of the corpse. This background of the atmosphere of Babylonian life is essential to those who seek to understand the often very complicated rites and incantations, which were considered essential to humanity of those times. Exorcism rites. Where there were demons, and as they were expected to attack men and women at any time, there was clearly grave need for methods by which such possession could be combated. When a man asked Jesus to cast the evil out of a possessed person into a herd of swine, he was asking for the repetition of one of the standard methods of Semitic exorcism. The 19th formula from one of Assurbanipal's protection rites, now in the British Museum in fragment form, gives the words of this rite. May the wicked demon depart. May they seize one another. The propitious demon, the propitious giant, may they penetrate his body. Spirit of the heavens, conjure it. Spirit of the earth, conjure it. The great Chaldean system of magic from the Nineveh excavations is contained in the three important magical works of the Turanian Akkadians. The first was entitled Wicked Spirits, and dealt exclusively with magical operations for repelling demons and spectres when they attacked, and, of course, to safeguard people against their approach. The second book, of which not much has been recovered, is a work of occult medicine. The third contained invocations and hymns addressed to various gods. As has been pointed out before, it is likely that these were three separate rites. One book for each class of sages, the astrologers and divines, the magicians proper, the physicians and philosophers. These are catalogued as such in Daniel. As with most occult writings, the originals, in the then dead Akkadian language, were believed to be the most potent. The actual spells and hymns were evidently recited in Akkadian, for each is accompanied by a translation in Assyrian, which was the living tongue at the time of their copying. The organization or plan of a spell was simple, though the endless repetition of its words were wearying. From an examination of the wording, it is clear that the actual words of power, the abracadabra, were the phrases, Spirit of the heavens conjure, Spirit of the earth conjure, which were always added, as was the word amanu, amen, translated from the Akkadian kakama, which had the same meaning of truth, or so it be. Sometimes the words of power formula itself was extended, making an appeal to several spirits. The actual content of the spell did not seem to have been so important. Thus we have, in the case of a person wishing to be secure against witchcraft, an appeal that evil doing should be banished, with the ending, Spirit of the heavens conjure it, Spirit of the earth conjure it, Spirit of Mulgalal, Lord of the countries, conjure it, Spirit of Ningalal, Lady of the countries, conjure it, Spirit of Nindara, powerful warrior of Mulgalal, conjure it, Spirit of Nusku, sublime messenger of Mulgalal, conjure it, Spirit of Enizana, eldest son of Mulgalal, conjure it, Spirit of Tishku, Lady of the armies, conjure it, Spirit of the murmur, king whose voice is beneficent, conjure it, Spirit of Utu, king of justice, conjure it, Spirits, archangels, great gods, conjure it. Where does the Babylonian pantheon fit in with Oriental magic as a whole? This is the point at which the much contested question, the lingering tradition of an esoteric supreme priesthood of magic, seems to take shadowy shape. For not only are the gods and goddesses of the Turanian, ancient Babylonian system connected by adoption and abstraction with powers venerated in the Finnish, Aryan and Semitic systems, and of course China and Japan, but in very many cases the magical rites of these and other nations depend upon the powers of those gods, as the multitude of spirits which are associated with them. Here, too, we come across the mana akasa theory, the belief that there is a supernatural force which permeates the atmosphere and which is personified as a power within all men. Towards the concentration of that elusive power and its aid in influencing spirits and gods, the activities of magicians are directed. There have been attempts at linking the pantheons of the Greeks, Egyptians, Babylonians, and Hindus, some more plausible than others. Such is not the intention of this book. At the same time, this subject does touch our investigation at a number of points. Reference to the schematic representation of Assyrian-Akkadian deities and their spheres of power given here will show this link up more clearly than words alone. Thought concentration among the Finns, for example, was attained in a manner familiar to the Indians or even the men of the Sudan, where I watched the preliminary rites of frenzy induction. According to the Finnish creed, every man bore within him from his birth a divine spirit who was his inseparable companion for life. This spirit became more closely united to its subject in proportion as the latter tore himself from earthly things to retire into the sanctuary of his soul. This was an important source of the magician's power. Here we have a close parallel with many mystical systems, including those of the gurus of India and the Arab Islamic Sufi principle. He aspired to a transcendental ecstasy, tula in tune, to a great state of excitement of the soul, tula haliohin, in which he became like the spirit dwelling in him and entirely identified with it. Again the spiritualist, spiritist, and again the frenzy and identification principle of the dervishes and fakirs. He used artificial means, intoxicating drugs for instance, compare Western witch cults, and in order to attain to this state of excitement, for it was only then that he succeeded, so to speak, in deifying himself, and received the homage of the genii and spirits of nature, this doctrine prevailed also in the Akkadian Babylonian magic books. This furnishes an affinity of conceptions and beliefs which is of great importance, since it is not one of those natural ideas which arise independently amongst widely differing nations. That quote from Lenormand, La Magie chez les Chaldéens, Paris, 1874. Whence ultimately came this power of magic? Who taught it or initiated it? What, in fact, is the fountain of mana akasa or life force? This is where an understanding of the demonology and theology of prehistoric nations is vital. Magicians, among the Finns, concentrated their invocations round the spirit of all life, Wainamoinen. It was he who taught magic to me, he who was the foundation of all life, Lord of the waters, Spirit of fire. In these respects he was almost certainly identical with the Akkadian Hea, Lord of life. Like Thoth of the Egyptians, he not only created magic but gave the knowledge of the words of power to men. He is thought to have been similar in conception to the Egyptian Ra, and he shares with Ra even the relatively minor function of distributing power and beneficence through the sweat from his body. The powers which the Scandinavian magicians acquired by this dedication to the earth spirit are not unlike the traditional thaumaturgy of sorcerers everywhere. As here quoted from Kalevala of the Finns. Lemminkainen went into the house which was full of people who talked amongst themselves. Some, wearing long robes, sat upon the seats, singers outside, reciters below the portals, with musical instruments all around the walls. Sorcerers sat near the hearth, at the place of honour. Then he began to weave spells. As soon as he started to sing, even the best singers found that they could utter only discordant notes. Even their hands were as if held in gloves of stone, on their heads was stone, their necks were bound with collars of stone. The men were flung into a sledge pulled by a strange-coloured cat, which carried them off into the world of evil spirits. And when he again recited, They threw themselves into Lapland's gulf, the waters which are the drink of the thirsting sorcerers. And then he sang yet again, and the people were tossed into the turbulent gulf which devours. Then Lemminkainen showed that he thought that the middle-aged and the young were fools, by means of his magical rites. The comparison of the magical and religious rituals of other nations has brought to light quite a number of correspondences between the secret powers formerly believed to have been unique to, or at least invented by, one or the other community. In the Akkadian Assyrian myth and legend, as well as in their spells and incantations, references to the histories and powers of the gods have enabled commentators to compile a partial list showing their relationship with one another. These facts have produced some interesting conclusions. The trinity formed by the sky, earth, and underworld are seen to have been fundamental in the Finnish and Chaldean systems as the elements to be propitiated and cultivated as sources of power. Samas, the sun, and in some ways an aspect of the earth, was connected with the Egyptian Ra. Even more interesting is the connection in the Semitic and other systems of the Akkadian god Mulge. This spirit, very widely appealed to for magical purposes, is both the heart of Akkadian sorcery and a central figure in several systems of the supernatural. As Bel, it was known as Baal in the Bible, and as Set in Egypt. To the Semitic Babylonians, Mulge was Belit, lord, sometimes as the female lady of the underworld, the Finnish Ilmarinen. Most of the god spirits have dual natures, being known as male by one name, female by another. This was the ancient Semite god of love and war, the Phoenician black stone, the Al-Lat of Arabia, who married her own son, Saturn. She was worshipped and invoked as Ishtar, sometimes called the demon Astaroth, beloved of the sorcerers. Called by the Greeks Aphrodite, this god of many aliases was also known as Tisku or Tammuz, destroyer of enemies, attainer of desires. Venus to the Romans, who carried her cult as far as Britain, the bride of Adonis, the ancient god Duzi, and sister of none other than the Akkadian Nanki-Gal, lady of Hades. Here we are at the very root of the demon spirit god system whence springs so much of Oriental and Western magic as we know it today. For her titles, Destroyer, Attainer, are a perfect summary of the desires of magicians. In addition to the gods, Babylonian magic took cognizance of a vast array of spirits, generally connected with the invisible world, and linking that world with mankind. That the gods and demons were closely allied is shown, for example, by the fact that the daughter of the Akkadian Anu, god of the sky, had a demon daughter, Labatu, the enemy of children. All these elements, gods, spirits, and planets were linked in a system which gave birth to astrology, and probably to the Jewish Kabbalah, the science of numerological philosophy which affected many other systems, including the Gnostics, all of which profoundly influenced Western magic. The genii, or spirits, included the following, who have Semitic and other parallels. The Alu, destroyers, whose province was the chest of man. The Akim, who worked in the bowels, and who had a secret number, so far undeciphered, of 40/60ths. The Telal, or warriors, who were connected in some way with the hand, and whose mystical number is still unknown. These unexplained numbers are thought to be connected with Kabbalism. The Maskim, layers of ambushes, with the fraction of 50/60ths. The Utuk, formerly evil demons in general. In addition to this, there were the Ardat, or nightmares, the Succubus, Lilith, or Elite, the Uruku, hobgoblins, giants, known as Lama. The latter were similar in some ways, it seems, to the good and bad genii of the Arabs. Many forms of genii were good or evil, according to how they were used. This form of thinking seems to continue from here into Western magic, with processes for the evocation of spirits, which will do whatever you wish. The spectres, phantoms, and vampires belong to the class of Labatu, daughter of the god Anu, the sky.